What's your favorite story? Whether it's from a TV show, a movie, or a book, what are the type of stories that you like to hear? I know for my wife Isabel, she loves any book written by Ted Decker. She has about 25 of his books, and it seems like he comes out with a new one every single year, which makes an easy Christmas gift for me. But she just loves the stories that he tells. What's your favorite story or book? Maybe put it in the comments section right now. I know for me, my favorite story when I was a lot younger, and even still to today, was Lord of the Rings. And yes, I'm a Lord of the Rings nerd, but I was so obsessed with everything about it. All the movies, I can recall tons of lines from the movies. I just love the characters, just the whole plot of it. I just was obsessed with Lord of the Rings as a kid. Just really spoke to me, really connected with that fantasy. For me today, as I'm almost 30 years old, I really like war stories, true stories of war, more specifically World War II. Now, not too long ago, I watched a video of a gentleman who said, once you reach the age of 30 as a man, you really get involved in one of two things. Either you really get involved and you learn how to smoke meats and you buy yourself a smoker, or you get involved and really interested in World War II. And I just had a good laugh about that because it was just related to me. I'm like, that is so true. I know some of my friends my age who bought a smoker, and I know some of my friends that really love World War II history. But I just love these war stories, these movies like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers or The Pacific or Hacksaw Ridge. All these stories just really hit me emotionally. Just the bravery, the brotherhood, the sacrifice all really speaks to me on a deep level. And I really believe that's why I'm attached to these stories and can recall them so well. And here's the thing. Stories are easier to remember than facts or what you ate for breakfast this morning, or what you're supposed to grab at the store later on today when you're there and you're like, why did I even come here, right? Stories are so easy to remember than anything else because stories are how we remember. It's how humanity has remembered and has been taught lessons all throughout history was through storytelling. There's something that goes on within our brains because when we hear a story rather than facts, there's more going on inside our brains. There's more of parts of our brains being used because we are trying so hard. Our brain wants to have the story that we're listening to relate to us in some sort of way. We want to relate that story to our own experiences. And when we do that, our brain actually does something chemically as well and releases the hormone oxytocin. And this is the bonding hormone. And so once you hear a story that just touches with, your heart and you get emotional about it and you kind of can relate your own experiences to it, you see yourself in that story. You start to live that story along with the storyteller because you just become bonded and invested in the story because you can relate it to your own experiences. To put it simply, storytelling and stories are powerful. And this is why I believe Jesus was a storyteller. When we look at the Gospels in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we read over 30 parables, these stories that Jesus would use to teach a lesson or to get a point across. He knew that storytelling was a great way for not only people to remember and to recall, but be able to relate their own experiences too. So when they would hear this parable, they could easily understand the lesson that Jesus was teaching because it was a story, and they would be able to remember it a lot easier. But not only did Jesus tell stories, he tells us to tell our story to other people. See, we've been in this series now. This is the last week of our series called Bless, where we've been looking at really ways to love our neighbor and change the world. And Bless is an acronym, as you know by now, where the B stands to begin with prayer. L means to listen. E means to eat and to eat with others and show hospitality. S, as we learned last week, was to serve other people. And this week, the last S is story. I believe one of the most powerful ways to bless someone is to share your story. Here's the thing, up to this point, all the other words for the acronym have been a lot of actions, right? Whether it's praying for someone, eating with someone, serving someone, listening to them, it's all been without words. But now to this point, when it comes to story, now it's about our words and what we say. That you can really, really reach somebody just by telling your story. And I know it may seem like that when I tell you that telling your story is a blessing to someone else, it may not seem like that. But here's the thing, when you tell your story, you're connecting with someone in a way that maybe they can relate their experiences to yours. And maybe they can see Jesus and how he's changed your life, and that would inspire them to maybe let Jesus have a change in their life. And so storytelling is so powerful. Pastor and theologian D.T. Niles said that Christianity is one beggar telling another beggar where they found bread. I think that's so powerful, right? There's a reason why this story of Jesus coming to the world and giving himself as a sacrifice to free us from our sin, to free us from being a prisoner of our sin, and just being able to set us free to this life of just purpose and meaning and hope. That's a story that all people can relate to. That's why it's called the gospel, which literally translates to the good news. What do we do with the good news? We tell other people the good news, the story of the gospel. And if this gospel is a part of our story, I believe it universally relates to all people as well. Just like D.T. Niles said, it's like one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. It's one starving soul to another starving soul. Hey, I have found bread. I have found a way to be filled. This story of Jesus coming to this planet is universally one that all of humanity can relate to, which means your story, I believe, is one too, and it's one that needs to be heard. Yet, sometimes we are so reluctant, right? Sometimes we're so afraid to tell our story, and there are a few reasons. I want to share with you three. Number one is we say, I don't have a good story. We don't think our story is very unique. We don't think our story is very gripping. And so a lot of times we compare our story with other people's and we're like, man, mine's not that dramatic. It's not that, maybe you grew up in Christianity and you grew up going to church and it's just kind of been a part of your life for a long time. So there wasn't this huge transformation. You're like, oh, it just kind of happened over time. Or maybe for you, your life was going great. You just life was good before you met Jesus, but now that you met him, it is a whole lot better, yes, but maybe it's not that dramatic where you're like, oh, yeah. A lot of times this is what we do. We think of the person that was like, you know what, before I met Jesus, I was into drugs, party, sex, and rock and roll. I used to run a dog fighting pit. And now that I met Jesus, I turned my life around. I now help people recover, and I now own an animal hospital and an animal shelter, like stuff like that. Where like I was once this and just so off the rails, but then I met Jesus, and now I'm saving people's lives physically and spiritually. And so we relate our story to that, and we're like, I don't have a good story. But here's the thing: really, honestly, the less unique your story is, the more people can actually relate to it. Because we've all had pitfalls. We all had loss. We've all had times in our life when we suffer, when we were at dark moments. We've all had times where we are at the lowest of our lowest. We're all imperfect. We all have these moments. And so the less unique your story is, a lot of times, the more people can actually relate to it. And I think that's powerful. And I think that's something we should all know, that even when we think we don't have a good story, we have no idea how powerful and how much it can actually relate, and how the experiences that we had and how they relate to other people's lives as well. Here's another reason we don't tell our story, or we're reluctant to, is because we don't think we have what it takes. Sometimes we're afraid of telling our stories because we may feel that they'll lead to questions we don't have an answer to. Like deep questions about faith and about Jesus or about the Bible and about God, philosophical deep stuff. And we're like, man, I don't have the answers to those questions. But the truth is, that's not what telling your story is about. It's not about answering those tough questions. It's just about sharing your experience and the evidence of how Jesus has changed your life. The truth is, we will never have all the answers. We'll never have all of humanity's answers this side of eternity, right? And so if we did have all the answers, there would be no reason to tell our story. There'd be no really much power behind it if everyone was just given a quick answer for why they should follow Jesus and have all the deep questions and answers. But there's a surrender to that, right? There's a surrender that we have to have, that we may not have all the answers. I've heard it said before that good news is better than good arguments. Yeah, there are people in your life that just want to argue or just want to debate, but at the end of the day, they can't argue your story or your experience and how Jesus has transformed you. And at the end of the day, your story is not about answering those tough questions. It's simply just telling your story and what Jesus has done in your life. In 1 Peter 3:15, Peter says this, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." See, a lot of people just stop at the word answer. Always be prepared to give an answer. And they like to say, you know what? That means you got to know all the answers. That means you got to take apologetics and have a defense for your faith and know all the tough questions. You got to be prepared for when people ask you for why you believe what you believe and why you believe it to be true, and you need the answers to all the proof. But here's the thing. It doesn't stop there. Peter says, no, be ready to give an answer for when everyone asks you why you have the hope that you have in Jesus. That's what we're supposed to be prepared to do. Be prepared to tell your story of why you have hope in Jesus. It's not so much about providing evidence. Your life is the evidence. But it says this, do this with gentleness and respect. Another reason why we're reluctant to tell our stories is because we don't want to impose our beliefs on our friends and our family. And of course, we don't want to turn people away. We don't want to feel like people are pressured into this religion. I know a lot of damage has been done in that sort of sharing of our faith, right? When it just seems forced, when it seems like you're imposing beliefs and being offensive. But that's not what telling your story is about. It's not about, again, like we learned at the beginning of the series, it's not about converting people. It's about blessing people. It's about showing love and loving our neighbor with all the same way that we love ourselves. See, oftentimes story, you need to remember that acronym, bless, story comes at the end. After you began with prayer, after you listened to them, after you ate and showed hospitality and kind of did life with them and had that intimate moment over a meal, and after you served them, and then you tell your story. I think that will make a whole lot more sense that when you tell your story, people are like, that all makes sense because they have been blessing me up to this point. See, here's the thing. Our motivation is always compassion. It's not about trying to force our beliefs on other people. Our motivation of why we bless other people is compassion. That's what Jesus did when he first saw people to heal them. He saw them with compassion. So our motivation is compassion. Our method is through blessing, this acronym for bless, and then comes confront. Now, a lot of times we get this backwards, where a lot of Christians will first try to confront and tell people what they're doing wrong with their lives, and telling people if they just went to church or they just accept Jesus, then things would be better, and pressuring in that way and trying to tell people who don't follow Jesus how to live their life. And then if they accept that, then we will connect with them and bless them and do life with them. And then even that, then we'll show compassion once they're one of us and coming to our church. But no, it's the opposite. You start with compassion, and then you move to blessing them, going through this acronym that we learned the past 5 weeks. And then you confront and say, do you want to follow Jesus? Do you want to live a better life? And a lot of times that confrontation is not done by us. It's done by the Holy Spirit. It's done by God. He's the one who does the change and has the conviction in people's hearts, not us and not our words. And that's not what our story is about either. Remember this 1 Peter 3:15, tell your story, tell the reason for the hope that you have in Jesus with gentleness and respect. We see so many times in Scripture where Jesus would encounter someone, their life would be changed, and then they would go and tell their story. And that's really what this whole this last S for story is all about. We see this happen in Scripture time and time again. One of those instances is in John chapter 4, where Jesus meets a woman at the well. And he has this encounter with her. He reveals everything about her life that she has done. And he offers her water. You know, they're at a well. He offers her water that would have her never thirst again, which is, you know, a living water that can only be found in Jesus. And here's what she does. Verse 28 in John 4, the woman left her water jar beside the well and she ran back to the village, telling everyone, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could he possibly be the Messiah?" And many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, "He told me everything I've ever did." So what did she do? She had an encounter with Jesus and she ran back to her village and she told her story, and people believed because of her story. We see this in another instance where Jesus heals this demon-possessed man. And after he's healed, he goes to Jesus and says, "Hey, can I follow you? I want to come with you," as Jesus is getting into a boat to leave. "Can I come with you?" And this is what Jesus says in Mark chapter 5, verse 19. But Jesus said, "No, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of the region and began to proclaim the great things that Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed at what he told them. This man wanted to go with Jesus. What did Jesus say to him? "No, go home and tell your story." And that's exactly what he did, and people were amazed by his story. Another instance where I really want to focus in on today is found in John chapter 9, where Jesus heals this man who has been blind from birth. In verse 6, it says this in chapter 9. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told them, "wash in the pool of Siloam," which this word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was, others said, "No, he only looks like him," but he himself insisted, "I am that man." "How then when your eyes open?" they asked. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go in the pool of Siloam, and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked. They see that this man, his life has completely been changed. They're like, "Is this the same person that used to be blind? Is this him? And what happened? What happened to you? How are you able to see?" And what does he do? He tells his story. And then all these people are like, "Where is this man? I need to see him. We need to find where he is." But the story doesn't end there. The Pharisees, these people are skeptic. These religious leaders, they're skeptic about who Jesus is, claiming to be the Son of God, claiming to be the Messiah. And so they try to find this man after hearing his story, try to find him to kind of interrogate him and try to find a reason that Jesus was a sinner. They're trying to find out if he healed on the Sabbath, which was a day of rest where they're not supposed to do any work. So they're trying to make Jesus into a sinner, not who he was, because they didn't believe who he was. And so they find this man who is healed, this blind man, and they began to interrogate him. They actually interrogate him 4 times. They even brought his parents in and said, "Has your son been blind since birth? Is this true?" And the parents are like, "I don't want any part of this story. Yes, he was blind at birth. He's old enough to answer you and to take care of himself." That's literally what they said. They didn't want to get involved or get in trouble. They're like, "Go ask him yourself. He's old enough." Okay? And so then it comes to verse 24. A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." I was blind, but now I see. I love that. So powerful. That's all his story was. I was this, then I met Jesus, and now I'm this. Verse 26, they said, "But what did he do?" they asked. "How did he heal you?" They're like, "How did he do it? Scientifically, spiritually. How was he able to hear you?" And the man says in verse 27, "Look, I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" In other words, this is what he's saying. I was blind, and now I see. What more evidence do you need to believe? What more can I say to you for you to be his follower too and to believe in him and to be his disciple? What more can I tell you? I was blind, but now I see. Nobody has ever been able to done this. No man can do this unless they're from God, is what he said to them. But they were always looking for answer of how. How did he do it? How did he change you? Where is he from? Is he a sinner? Is he this? Trying to be so skeptical. But I think we can find a lesson in this story. I was blind and now I see. This man's story gives us a great framework for telling our story. Here's the first part when it comes to telling your story. I was blind. This is who you were before you met Jesus. Maybe you would say something, I used to be really angry. I used to be lost. I used to be very unforgiving. I used to show no grace. I used to be full of anxiety. I used to have no hope and no purpose. I was afraid. I was alone. Whatever it may be, this is who you were before you met Jesus. Part 2 of your story is that he put mud in my eyes. This is how you met Jesus. Maybe you grew up in church, but then you fell away a little bit as you got older, and then you returned, and you're like, I just felt something within me that was drawn back to this. I know I need this in my life, and so I was just drawn back to Jesus. He just pulled me back to him, and I just decided to go to church. I felt his leading in my life. Or maybe you were in a time of crisis, you were at your lowest of lows, and you just decided there has to be something more. There has to be something out there. There has to be a higher power. There has to be someone who can fill this void within me. Maybe that was you, and then I met Jesus, and everything changed. Maybe somebody just simply invited you. You had a friend or a family member that just said, come with me to church today. You want to come with me? I know this great place, great message, great time. And that's as simple as you did. You just were invited, you came, and it changed your life forever. Then it comes to part 3, which I believe is the most important part of telling your story, is the now I see. This is who you are now that you met Jesus. What difference has following Jesus made in your life? How has knowing him impacted your life and how you walk through both the good and the bad today? It's simply this. I was, but God, now I. Who I was before I met Jesus, how I met Jesus, and who I am now with Jesus. See, God has you where you are for a reason. You are wired, anointed, and appointed for your occupation, or for the school that you go to, the neighborhood that you live in, the street that you live on, for the parents you have, for the kids that you have, for all your relatives. We are all on mission. And God has placed us exactly where we are for a reason. We're all on mission. We're all sent. We're all called to bless. We're all called to love our neighbor as ourselves. And one of the greatest ways that we can bless someone is simply by telling others about your story. I was blind. He put mud in my eyes, and now I see. I was, but God, now I. We're all on this mission of being sent. I think what I really have gotten out of this series so far is kind of this idea that I'm on a mission, that I am sent, that God sends me into this world. It says this in Romans chapter 10, verses 13 through 15. It says, for everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they call on him to be saved unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? This is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of the messengers who bring good news. How can people be saved unless they believe? How can they believe unless they hear? How can they hear unless somebody tells them? How can somebody tell them unless they are sent? We are all sent, church. Funny enough, in this story where Jesus heals this blind man and he's told to go to the pool of Siloam, John gives us a little parenthesis there where he says, which means sent, that Siloam means sent. So the blind man was sent to the pool, called sent, by the one who himself is sent by God into this world. So that's really what I have gotten out of this series called Bless. I'm sent on this mission to bless, to pray for others, to listen, to have this intimate moment of inviting people to eat with me, to serve others around me, and to tell others my story. Because how can they believe unless someone tells them? How can someone tell them unless I am sent and know that I'm on this mission? Here's the thing. I know everyone listening today, you may be at a different stage in your story. Maybe you're at stage 1 and you haven't quite yet given your life to Jesus. This is who you are before you met Jesus. You haven't quite said yes, you haven't fully believed. Maybe you're like the Pharisees and you just have some skepticism, you have some questions, you have some doubt of what this is all about. I want to just challenge you and encourage you to continue coming out, continue investigating this, and just searching out those answers. But here's the thing, we may not ever find the answers to all their questions. And it really just takes surrendering to Him and asking God to just reveal Himself to you in time. Maybe you're at stage 2 and maybe you're just meeting Him for the first time today. Maybe you're just hearing about Jesus for the first time today and you're like, man, I really need to believe. May today, as you're watching right now, be your moment where you say yes to Jesus and you dive into that and you just surrender to Him. If you're at part 3 and you've been following Jesus for a while now, I want you to know that just as I'm sent, you're sent. We're on mission. And I pray that you would tell your story to someone in your life, because there's someone in your life today that needs to hear your story, that can relate to your story, and you have no idea how your story could change someone else's life. Maybe it's the person that you wrote on your Who is My Neighbor card at week 1, the beginning of the series of who to pray for. I pray that this week that you would continue to pray for that person as Easter is coming next Sunday. That God would give you an opportunity to maybe tell your story to them and give them an invite to our Easter services. Show the other person starving where you found bread. Hey church, before you go,